Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topic for tonight is Neoliberalism Still Ascendant. And there's Steve Day. Hi, Steve. How are you? Nice to see you. Under the heading of Neoliberalism Still Ascendant, we're going to be discussing four things tonight. First of all, we'll be talking about the harms of trickle-down. Also, Project 2025, Apes Hitler's Playbook. Also, the unions down in Argentina are staging a general strike because of President Milei's neoliberal blitz, and the general strike is quite large. Finally, we'll be discussing death, by oil. What big oil does is, when it drills, when it refines, it basically sets up sacrifice zones where there are unusual death rates for people who happen to live in that area. We'll be discussing that here tonight. Excuse me a second. I don't know about you, but for me, sneezes usually come in doubles, even triples sometimes. Let's hope it's only doubles right now. Anyway, we'll start off with trickle down, the harms of trickle down. Okay, this piece appeared in Common Dreams. There's a picture of Ronnie Reagan, then U.S. President Ronald Reagan, was pictured speaking at a fundraiser. Excuse me. Reports, the headline of this piece is Reports Expose Deep Harms of Corporate Tax Cuts and, quote, trickle down, unquote, on ideology. Failing to reimagine a more ambitious and comprehensive use of corporate tax policy prevents us from achieving a more equitable, sustainable, and democratic economy. To that, all I have to say is do tell. This piece is by Jake Johnson, January 23rd, 2024. Two new reports published Tuesday by the Roosevelt Institute, God, I hadn't heard much from them for some time, argue that robust corporate taxation is key to creating a strong economy and improving the well-being of families and children. Objectives that have been undermined in the decades since the last Reagan era by regressive tax cuts were enacted on the false premise that benefits would, quote, trickle down, unquote, to the rest of society. Well, I'm certainly for taxing the rich and the corporations as much as possible, but we've got to understand that we can fund things and that, in fact, corporate taxes and personal taxes at the federal level do not fund anything. The way the government spends is by appropriating money. The Treasury Department actually does the spending, and the way the money for spending comes into the Treasury spending account is through the Federal Reserve creating new dollars all the time. Not going to go through an explanation of that. It's a technical explanation coming out, okay, of MMT, and it's not really the point here, since I am certainly for heavy taxes on the corporations and also the rich. Anyway, the first report from the Roosevelt Institute says, the title is A Mapping of the Full Potential of U.S. Corporate Taxation to Enhance Child and Family Well-Being, examines what the authors described as the understudied notion that, quote, increasing corporate taxation will necessarily help children and families by providing additional revenue for essential public services, unquote. Again, okay, I have to say, we don't need to tax for revenue. Taxes do not produce funds in the Treasury spending account. The relationship of taxing to revenue, is indirect. The fact that the Roosevelt Institute doesn't understand this 14 years after MMT attained a degree of prominence, and the economists over there were certainly informed of some of the MMT point of view, is simply scandalous. It's a result of a think tank just wanting to keep on lying about how federal funding and federal spending actually occurs. That perspective runs counter to what the Roosevelt Institute's second report calls a, quote, cut to grow mentality, unquote, that rose to prominence in the 1970s and was enthusiastically embraced by the administration of President Ronald Reagan. Yes. Under this view, the thinking went, it was necessary to reduce the corporate tax rate to grow the economy, that this growth would allow gains to eventually, quote, trickle down, unquote, from the rich shareholders to the middle class. The report states, quote, during this time, the corporate tax rate was gradually reduced to 35% before it was dramatically cut to 21% in 2017. These cuts resulted in corporate tax revenues falling to less than 10% of total tax revenues. I don't want to be misunderstood. There are corporate tax revenues. They are created, but in the course of the federal government, the Treasury Department depositing the corporate tax revenues, and also any proceeds from bonds and security sales, those monies are destroyed by the Federal Reserve at the settlement. Then the Federal Reserve creates entirely new money, dollar for dollar, to be placed in the Treasury spending account, also known as the Treasury General Account. That's the way things happen. Okay. essentially the money needed to spend what we have to spend to benefit people, all that we have to spend, okay, to benefit people, okay, even as much as 10 trillion a year for the Green New Deal, can be supplied without any increase in taxation, solely through, well, there actually are a variety of methods. One method that I favor is the minting, okay, of platinum coins. That can be done solely through the executive branch. A single platinum coin, for example, can result in new money eventually placed in the Treasury spending account of close to $100 trillion. That money can be used to spend congressional appropriations and to pay back all federal debt, okay, as it falls due. We still want to tax. There are many reasons to tax. Some reasons to tax are that taxing destroys money in the private sector, and so that undercuts inflation. Another reason to tax is remove money from the billionaires so that they have less to spend on political projects. Now, to do that, you might have to put very high taxes in for the billionaires. There might have to be wealth taxes, which ensure that we have no more billionaires. So I'm all for taxing. I just want it to be clearly understood that the ability to tax or the inability to tax, okay, due to political considerations does not amount to an inability to spend. We can still spend if Congress is willing to appropriate the spending. I mentioned one method of putting the money in the Treasury spending account so the Treasury Department can spend appropriations of Congress. There's a second method, okay, that is more efficient, but it requires the cooperation of Congress. Specifically, when Congress passes money bills of any kinds, the continuing resolutions, okay, or appropriations bills, two sentences have to be included in those bills that order the Federal Reserve to place the necessary money for spending the appropriations and paying back the principal and interest on securities that are due in the particular period of time, okay, of an appropriations. Two sentences are necessary to order the Federal Reserve, okay, to do that. And then the Federal Reserve, which is the creature of Congress, and can be ordered to create whatever money Congress wants it to create, will go ahead and create that necessary money without any increase in taxes. Quote, perhaps more than any other, President Ronald Reagan leveraged mounting backlash to taxation and government spending to dramatically reduce both, regardless of the consequences to American families, the report says. The decades-long decline in corporate tax rates has severely undermined the federal government's ability to finance critical public goods from education to childcare. No, that statement is false. It is not true. There were a lot of things that severely undermined the federal government's ability to finance, but they were political things. They were political issues. They were ideologies. They were beliefs in such things as uh, but tax revenues and bond revenues fund federal spending. Going on, quote, since regressive corporate tax cuts don't significantly increase earnings for working families through either wage or employment increases, but they do reduce the government's ability to fund family income and care supports. Child care costs, which are already rising, can become a relatively more expensive line item in working parents' household budgets, unquote. Reads the Roosevelt Institute's first report, authored by Emily DeVito, okay, and also Nico Luziani. Quote again, when they can't afford child care, unquote, they added, quote again, parents face the difficult choice of having to cut costs in other places, often on the basic necessities that allow children to thrive, like food, clothing, and enrichment activities, or taking on additional caregiving duties themselves, unquote. At the state and local levels, DeVito and Luziani noted corporations' successful efforts to avoid their full property tax liability devastate public school budgets. And they do. And at the state and local levels, taxes do fund state spending. And revenues from bond issues do fund state spending as well. So the Roosevelt Institute tweets, new corporate tax policy has undermined child and family well-being. Now, two new reports argue that progressive corporate tax reform are crucial to generating revenues and shaping an economy that grows equitably to ensure benefits for all families. Again, those two reports simply ignore other ways of financing federal spending. And therefore, what they do is create a picture that it is necessary to fight with the opponents of taxation to fund the kind of federal spending, okay, that we need. It may be necessary to fight with them to ensure that these forces are not so destructive, okay, to our democracy. But we don't have to fight with them to generate the funds that are needed for federal spending. So this is from the RooseveltInstitute.org series, The Intersection of Corporate Taxation and Child and Family Well-Being. Looking back over the past 50 years of corporate tax reforms demonstrates just how entrenched the neoliberal narrative around tax cuts has become. And I have to add, the Roosevelt Institute shares the neoliberal notion that in order to spend, you have to tax, okay, first. That is a false narrative. It creates conflicts that are not necessary and that have undercut the ability to raise funds from other sources. DeVito, deputy director of the Corporate Power Program at the Roosevelt Institute, said Tuesday that, quote, we have a false idea in the U.S. that corporate tax policy is unrelated to equitable social reforms, unquote. Yes, we do have, okay, a false idea. corporate tax policy is related to equitable social reforms in the sense that the higher the corporate tax rates are, the less money the corporations will have to try to buy elections. That's where the relationship is. Quote, however, strong corporate tax policy is vital to all aspects of a thriving economy, unquote, she argued, quote again, and the failing to reimagine a more ambitious and comprehensive use of corporate tax policy prevents us from achieving a more equitable, sustainable, and democratic economy and society for all families. Here, I have to add, something else. We need so much money to fund, a Green New Deal and to fund the policies associated with the Green New Deal, such as a federal job guarantee, all kinds of alternative power programs, various kinds of environmental and conservation methods. We may need as much as $10 trillion per year for 10 years and more in order to accomplish all that. We can't get that just from changing corporate tax policy. And even if we add changes to individual tax policy, there is not enough money that can be raised, in that way. We're talking about raising $100 trillion over 10 years. That can't be done by increasing taxes. Now again, I'm all for increasing taxes. I don't want any billionaires. We need taxation to get rid of the billionaires. And I don't want to allow any corporate contributions, of any kind. And insofar as different corporate tax policy would undercut the funding of election campaigns by the corporations, that's certainly good. But what is preventing us from achieving a more equitable, sustainable, and democratic economy and society for all families is the false idea that the Roosevelt Institute is purveying in this, that we must have corporate tax reform, in order to be able to afford the changes we need to respond to the climate emergency and other emergencies we find ourselves in the middle of. That is not true. And we have to continue to deny that and to call into question reports like this that are based on that kind of assumption. The new reports coming on come a week after a bipartisan pair of House and Senate negotiators announced a deal to expand the child tax credit for 3 years in exchange for a series of corporate tax cuts. Yeah, that was idiocy. That was a terrible deal. They gave up 5 times the revenue in corporate tax cuts that they gained in child care tax credit spending. 5 times. That was a terrible bargain. It was a terrible trade-off. It was a trade-off governed by neoliberal philosophy. Because, of course, people believe corporate tax cuts are good because they believe in trickle-down. American Prospect's Dave Dayen estimated that, quote, in a time period when all the tax credits are actually in place, the business tax changes are 5 times more costly than the CTC changes. That's because too much of the Democratic Party is neoliberal, and they were unwilling to bargain hard with the Republicans to get a more equitable deal. Quote, who knows if this deal can pass in time to take effect in the upcoming 2023 tax season, if ever. Senator Mike Crapo, Republican of Idaho, the ranking Republican on the Senate Finance Committee, is already asking for changes to make it even more generous to business. That's in part a function of dissembling that there is, quote, parity, unquote, in the deal. Truth is, this is not an equal trade, and it may extend that inequity well into the future, unquote. That warning is in line with the Roosevelt Institute's new research, which argues that a corporate tax code generous to big business fuels inequality by benefiting capital interests, i.e. business owners, partners, and shareholders, at the expense of workers, and their families. It's not that they're simply benefited by increasing wealth. They are also benefited because of the increase in wealth for business owners, partners, and shareholders at the expense of workers and their families. There's also a political benefit. The business owners, the partners, and the shareholders have increased political power at the expense of the political power of workers, and their families. That's the real reason why higher corporate taxation, is needed, and why also wealth taxation is needed. Quote, when corporations enjoy low taxes on their profits, they face a trade-off for how to otherwise disperse them. Make investments in the workforce and productive capacity, e.g. raise wages, hire more workers, and or upgrade buildings, equipment, or technology, or distribute them to shareholders, i.e. pay out dividends and buy back stock to inflate prices. Data shows that executives typically choose the latter. This is a typical myopic point of view. The other choice they face is whether they ought to use the consequences of them having lower taxes, to make investments in a more favorable political environment, to them. And they often choose to buy congresspeople, and to buy state legislators, and to buy politicians, and to buy government, in general. That's a choice that over the last 40 years, they've never failed to make. That's why we need desperately a dump the corruption program. Reuven S. Aviona, professor of law at the University of Michigan, and the lead author of the new report on unquote, cut to grow, unquote, ideology, said in a statement that corporate tax policy since Reagan has been driven by the trickle-down economics narrative that cutting the taxes on job creators will benefit less wealthy U.S. taxpayers. When you read something like this, you sort of get the impression that trickle-down the tax policy and that the ideology of trickle-down was something new that was instituted by Reagan. But the idea of trickle-down has been around at least since the Roosevelt administration, when Roosevelt joyously criticized the trickle-down theory in his various speeches. And the Democrats, of course, for years and years and years, were making fun of the idea, of trickle-down. So, why did the idea suddenly become popular under Reagan and to some degree under Jimmy Carter during the 1970s? It was because of the failure of Keynesian economics to account for the cost push, inflation, of the early 1980s and also the early 1970s and the latter part of the 1970s, okay, as well. The Keynesians just couldn't explain how you could have, okay, inflation and high unemployment, okay, at the same time. Since they couldn't, it became acceptable for people to think in terms of monetary policy as the solution for fighting, okay, inflation. And that's when Keynesianism got out, okay, of fashion. That's when spending money for the benefit of people uh, uh, got out of fashion. Okay, because the idea came to the fore that spending money on people was, okay, inflationary, and the serious supply side inflations, okay, of the 1970s got people thinking that when you increase demand in the economy, you inevitably have inflation. But of course, the inflation of the 70s, in part, was caused by a weak political will. One thing that really works to contain inflation when you start to get it is to use wage and price controls. But both Nixon and Carter, though they experimented with those, failed to implement the kinds of wage and price controls that we had in the Second World War. Those worked. The wage and price controls of the 1970s did not work because they were not systematic and they were not pursued with the political will that was needed. Now, Carter did try to decrease inflation by working the supply side. He recognized that the inflation of the 70s was fueled, okay, by big oil raising prices. So he tried to deregulate, okay, the natural gas market, okay, to provide alternative sources, okay, of fuel that would undercut, okay, the price of oil. He succeeded, but the deregulation took, okay, too long. By the time it was in place in the early 1980s, it benefited the administration, okay, of Ronald Reagan. So Carter started out, okay, to deregulate, if I recall correctly, in 1978. But the deregulation only worked for Ronald Reagan and not for Jimmy Carter. So, such an idea is often offered in tandem with the notion that this is the only way tax policy can help American families, unquote, said Aviona. And quote again, but this just isn't true. In fact, this false cut to grow narrative has made it very difficult to argue for a more expansive, progressive vision of corporate tax reform, contributing to a decades-long stalemate in efforts toward real, comprehensive corporate tax reform. Well, that is true. The ideology, okay, of neoliberalism supported the cut, okay, to grow narrative. It was part, okay, of that narrative. And that did make it very difficult to argue, okay, for a progressive vision of corporate tax reform. But what also made it hard to argue was the absence, okay, of a narrative to attack Okay, the neoliberal economic assumptions. Such assumptions as there is no such thing as public money. It's all your money coming from taxation, okay, and from borrowing. That was one of the major principles of neoliberalism, okay, during this time. And most people bought off on that. They were proud to think that there was no such thing as public money, that it was all their money. But the truth is that it was all public money, at least at the federal level. None of their money paid for anything and hadn't been paying for anything since 1971. Quote, now is the time, unquote, he added, to quote again, reverse this trend with a more historically grounded support of the corporate tax. So once again, just to summarize, I'm all for raising corporate taxes to the skies. Okay, I really am. The reason why I want to do that, though, is to undercut the capabilities of corporations, to fund political candidates, and to shape opinion through their control, okay, of the media. That's why that, okay, is so important. Another reason why, okay, it's so important is because of the way the tax system, okay, actually works. When corporate tax rates are very high, the incentive is there for corporations to spend money, okay, on investments, because when they spend money on investments, when they spend money on growth, okay, in their own companies, they can expense that money. And invariably, they would rather spend it on their corporations than they would have it taken away from them by taxation. So higher corporate tax rates were actually a spur to economic growth, okay, in earlier years, because the heads of corporations would rather reinvest in those corporations than have the money taken away by the federal government in taxes. So let's sort of keep that in mind. And let's go over to the second article. Before I do that, let me see how we're doing here tonight. Hello, Steve Wolfbrandt. How are you? And Robert Copeland says Congress will never go along with $10 trillion deal for a Green New Deal. I know, Robert. That's why I want to dump the corruption. So we don't have a Congress that's bought. So we have a Congress that will look to the people for support. Steve Wolfbrand says, stagflation. Steve Day says, gone for so long, I drop in and catch my favorite sector of knowledge. Thank you. Oh, you mean some MMT? There is a bit of MMT in this, at least. A bit of basic MMT, though I'm not going overboard completely with MMT. Only some of the basics. Okay, the next piece I want to talk about is really an important one. I picked it up in LA Progressive. It came from, where did it come from? Let me see. Usually these are at the end. Okay, this didn't appear anywhere else, uh, as far as I know. It was written for this publication, okay, LA Progressive, by Steve Miller. Not the same Steve Miller who was a functionary in the Trump administration. He is actually Stephen Miller, I believe. All this K is actually Steve Miller. It was updated 3 hours ago. The original was published on January 21st, 2024. I wonder what the update is. Title is Project 2025 Apes Hitler's Playbook. What is astounding is that U.S. fascists also are adopting almost the identical road to power that was used by Hitler in 1933. That is interesting. And an article outlining this is interesting. And there's a cartoon of Dumb Don with in jailbird clothes with swastikas on his hat. Quid pro quo, free Trump. The jailbird clothes are there because many legal people think it's likely that he will go to prison for various crimes he committed at various times that he's now being called to account for in the various lawsuits that he's facing. There, of course, is a caricature of Don, okay, with blonde hair and a Hitler mustache, burning up the calendar, burning up the Constitution, complete with a ball and chain. So, one of fascism's distinguishing characteristics is a compulsive drive to think backwards to the past, to look for solutions to new problems. Make America great again, back to those simpler, happier times of Jim Crow segregation, anti-gay laws, and McCarthyite anti-communism. The Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 is the fascist program for whoever becomes president in 2024, whether Republican or Democrat. It is also designed for and offered to every politician in America. On its face, their document, Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, is a program that calls for restoring every element of white Christian dictatorship, protect billionaires, make corporations impervious to the people, indemnify killer cops, privatize schools, also abolish Black history and LGBTQ plus laws, censor books, purge the country of thinking. One of the favorite guys who wants to purge the country of thinking is Mike Pence. He's been for doing away with thinking since he was just a congressman in 2009. In fact, I wrote a column there about how Mike Pence wanted to get rid of all thinking. What is astounding is that U.S. fascists also are adopting almost the identical road to power used by Hitler in 1933. The Reichstag fire was on February 27th, 1933. The fascists set fire to the national seat of government in Berlin, and of course the particular fascists who did this were the Nazis, and then blamed it on the communists. They proclaimed it was necessary to impose impose martial law to save the country. This, of course, was just public relations. Hitler had been in power for 28 days. He had lost the election in late 1932, but the aged general that won immediately appointed him, as head of state. The Agent General, of course, was General von Hindenburg as head of state, and then retired. The day after the fire, Hitler issued the Reichstag Fire Decree, which abolished civil rights, allowed for indefinite arrest and detention, and the authority to overrule state and local governments. In March, just a few days later, the Nazis passed the Enabling Act, which empowered Hitler and his cabinet to implement and enforce laws without the approval of any other branch of government. Hitler now ruled by decree. The combined effect of the Enabling Act and the Reichstag Fire Decree transformed Hitler's government into a legal dictatorship. A month later, the Nazis quickly passed, quote, the law for the restoration of the professional civil service. This is a quote from Wikipedia. The law for the restoration of the professional civil service, also known as Civil Service Law, Civil Service, the Restoration Act, and law to reestablish the civil service, was enacted by the Nazi regime in Germany on the 7th of April, 1933. This law, which followed Adolf Hitler's rise to power by 2 months and the promulgation of the Enabling Act by 2 weeks, constituted one of the earliest instances of anti-Semitic and racist legislation in Germany, unquote. The primary objective of the law was to establish a, quote, national, unquote, and, quote, a professional, unquote, civil service. Thank you. By dismissing certain groups of tenured civil servants, individuals of non-Aryan origin, particularly those of Jewish descent, were compelled to retire, while members of the Communist Party or affiliated organizations were to be terminated from their positions. Also, the law forbade Jews, non-Aryans, and political opponents from holding positions as teachers, professors, judges, or within the government. Its reach extended to other professions such as lawyers, doctors, tax consultants, and also musicians and notaries. At first, the law sought the dismissal of all non-Aryan civil servants, but subsequent amendments were introduced to exempt World War I individuals serving since August 1914, and those who had lost family members in the war. Project 2025 calls for these same 3 steps to be taken after the 2024 election. Here's the parallel with Hitler's civil service decree. Project 2025, it declares war on the administrative state, quote unquote. Their term for the government bodies that protect the environment, require healthy food, and guarantee the health and safety to the public. Safety of the public, sorry. There are a number of typos in here. Okay. The term administrative state refers to the policy making work done by the bureaucracies of all the departments of the federal government, agencies, and millions of employees. The conservative promise lays out how to use many of these tools, including how to fire supposedly, quote, unfireable, unquote, federal bureaucrats, how to shutter wasteful and corrupt offices and bureaus, how to muzzle woke propaganda at every level of government, how to restore the American people's constitutional authority over the administrative state. All this should be in scare quotes, of course. And how to save untold taxpayer dollars in the process. Of course, I have to add to this, there's no such thing as taxpayer dollars, at least not when it comes to spending. Taxpayer dollars are all destroyed in the settlement process at the Federal Reserve. And the president must rely on the men and women appointed to the White House. There simply are not enough hours in the day to manage the affairs of state single-handedly. So delegation is not just advisable, it is essential. The decisions that assistants and senior advisors make will directly impact the administration, its legacy, and most important, the fate of the country. Their agenda must therefore be the president's agenda. Choosing who will carry out that agenda on a daily basis is not only one of the first decisions the president makes in office, but also one of the most critical. The tone and tempo of an administration are often determined on January 20th. That was page 23 of the 2025 agenda. The program of fascism has been modernized somewhat, but it is both weird and indicative that U.S. fascism proposes to follow the same path. Here we see, rooted in government, the authoritarian theory of the unitary executive. This is the primary of the presidency has greater authority over law and its implementation than Congress. This means the president can rule by decree. The seizure of power is strikingly parallel to the Enabling Act. The program of fascism has been modernized somewhat, but is both weird and indicative that U.S. fascism proposes to follow the same path. Trump says he'll only be a dictator on day one. He's right. He has already said that he will invoke the powers of the police against anyone he determines by proclaiming the flawed Insurrection Act of 1807. That's the dictator part. After that, by the unitary executive theory, Trump's decrees will be legal and have the force of law. But once again, strikingly similar to the Enabling Act and the Reichstag fire decree. Project 25 intends to direct every politician who wants dark money to gut the government. They also virtually call for America to end the separation of church and state, to become a white Christian dictatorship. All that's missing is the Reichstag fire. Oh yeah, George Bush already did that one on 9/11. Well, the fascists will think of something else. This fascist seizure of power can be stopped, but it must be directly confronted. Every idea, every passive conciliation, all forms of collaboration with them must be rejected as sterile. They must be called out. That's how to win. We can go on the attack with ideas. We could go on the attack with program-specific demands that government serve the people, not the corporations. The historical lesson from the Nazis onward in history is that we cannot fight fascism from the middle. We must expose and attack every notion, assumption, and justification. This program is the opposite. The demand that government's job is to provide everything to everyone, to guarantee the basic necessities of a healthy life to everyone, and then to take on the necessity that we must heal nature, humanity, and the planet. So that's an interesting piece, I think. The parallels, are interesting. What's the connection, to neoliberalism? Well, Project 2025 of the Heritage Foundation arises out of the radical form, of neoliberalism that first came to prominence but during the 1970s and was first implemented during the 1980s by the Reagan administration. Not that the Reagan administration itself was fascist, but the placing of profits over people and the consequences of doing that for 40 years has prepared the ground for the fascists. and Project 2025, as you see from this article, outlines how the fascists will be able to take power if Donald Trump can win the presidency again. Now, Steve Miller says that Project 2025 is offered to all politicians and not simply to the Republicans. And this is true. But, of course, at the same time, I think the Republican Party will pick up this agenda starting in 2025 with both hands, and will implement it. And if the Democrats, or hopefully an independent or third-party candidate, takes control of the White House, takes control of the Congress, it's very unlikely that such a third party will implement Project 2025, since it comes out of neoliberal and Republican circles, even though the Democratic Party has been inclining towards fascism. I don't see the Democratic Party taking the actions we see here. The Democratic Party seems to prefer the practices of inverted totalitarianism to an open form of fascism. So I think the Democratic Party has to be feared as well. But certainly the Republicans must be stopped in 2024. I have to say, I think the Democrats must be stopped also. I think both Republican candidates and Democratic candidates are unacceptable. We need to elect third-party candidates who are not beholden to big money. That doesn't include Bobby Kennedy. It's obvious that he is beholden to big money, and that he owes loyalty to the Israeli lobby that he has already bought by the Israeli lobby. I don't know whether he will stay bought, but as the campaign goes on, we will find out as we watch the contributions come in and as we see the evolution of his position on what is genocide. And this is a good time to mention, I think, that this is a good time to mention that tomorrow at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, the International Court of Justice will meet again, and we will find out whether they're ready to take strong action against the genocide, whether they think there is a possibility of genocide going on in Gaza, and whether the provisional measures they recommend to stop the genocide will be strong enough to stop it. So, there will be a broadcast. It'll probably be available on YouTube, as the first two of their streams were. It's going to start at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, as I said. At 8 a.m. Around the World with Dee and Friends, we'll have a special program on what's going on at the International Court of Justice. And as much as it hurts me to say so, I will be around at 7 a.m. to watch the proceedings at the World Court, and I will be around as part of Dee's panel on her show at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning to talk about what's going on there. Okay, for now, I see some comments. Steve Day says, the basics are fine and are enough to go into macro economics. Thank you, Steve Day. Robert Copeland says, it will take years for dump the corruption to be powerful enough to make a difference on how Congress votes. All I have to say to that, Robert, is if it takes years, you can stick a fork in us because we're done. If we don't get this meeting by 2024, if we don't get dump the corruption moving in time for this election in 2024, we won't be able to clean enough people, out of Congress to make a difference for how Congress votes when it comes to Medicare for all and when it comes to a Green New Deal. We need both of those things absolutely beginning in 2025. We have no more time to meet, the climate emergency. The only reason why it may take years for dump the corruption to become sufficiently powerful is because people won't get on board with it and start working on it. It is initially up to us. It's up to us to involve other people. It's up to us to grow this movement. And while I'm grateful for everybody who comes here and watches the shows, we have to do more to grow the movement. Because if we are stuck with Donald Trump or another Republican who's going to implement Project 2025, or we are stuck with Biden, and another Democrat who's going to continue to implement what are essentially neoliberal policies in both domestic and foreign policies, as I said earlier, you can stick a fork in us because we will be done. Hashtag dump the corruption 2024 is correct. We have no more time. Climate change, technology will come to the rescue. It always does. Steve, it hasn't come to the rescue thus far. And there's no indication that people will be willing to make the kinds of investments in technology to, have it actually make a difference. And even if those investments do come to pass somehow, the technology you're talking about, which is carbon capture, engineering, is something that has to be implemented by large companies that in turn will work with the deep state to increase the level of totalitarianism here in the United States. We need technologies that will save us, but that will not be based on corporate concentration. Carbon capture technology is a political danger, to all of us. This has to be based on solar, has to be based on wind, has to be based on water, has to be based, on geothermal technology. I think the technology, is already there. All we have to do is to plan it, okay, and to fund it. Steve asks, will fusion be practical? Again, fusion is the kind of technology that gets exploited by the large companies and creates increasing concentration, okay, in the economy. I know that there is a certain kind of fusion technology here which uses uh, basically smaller fusion plants. Okay, they may be possible, but I don't see that happening, okay, in a sufficient amount of time. We have to get on top of the climate emergency in the next 5 years. Fusion ain't coming as an operational technology in that time. It's just not going to happen. I'll now go on to the next piece. And I got to roll through these because I got a hard stop at 10:30 tonight because of the early day tomorrow. So, there is a neoliberal victory going on in Argentina. You see here a photograph. La patria no se vende. Okay, the country cannot be sold. And then there's another sign about someone by the name, okay, of Miguel something. In the context of a city government. Protesters hold a banner reading, "The homeland is not for sale." During January 24, 2024, general strike against the government of Argentine President Javier Milei in Buenos Aires. Argentine unions lead general strike, okay, against Javier Milei's neoliberal blitz. Quote, "In 40 years of democracy, there's never been such a frontal attack on the labor sector," unquote, said one union leader. This is by Brett Wilkins, dated January 24th, 2024. Many thousands of Argentine workers walked off their jobs, took to the streets Wednesday in a general strike led by the nation's largest labor unions against far-right President Javier Milei's all-out assault on worker rights, vital social programs, and the right to protest. The opposition aligned Confederación General del Trabajo, CJT, an umbrella labor group boasting about 7 million members, led the general strike against Javier Milei. The 53-year-old described, quote, anarcho-capitalist, unquote. Took office last month following his decisive victory in November's presidential runoff. Excuse me a second. I have to take a couple of pills. Marching under the slogan, quote, "Our homeland is not for sale," unquote, the CJT led demonstrators filled streets in the capital, Buenos Aires, and smaller cities around the South American country of nearly 46 million inhabitants. Not sure that population figure is right, but let's take it for the moment. The general strike is kicking off in Buenos Aires. The first organized wave of resistance to Javier Milei's anarcho-capitalist authoritarianism. This is from a tweet by David Adler. Which can be watched on X. Perhaps I'll play a little of it here. Okay, so cool. Okay, what can I say? The demonstration is big, and impressive. Short, 11-second clip. Quote, we called a march on January 24th to defend labor rights, severance pay, collective bargaining agreements, Social Security, and the right to protest. All of which have been attacked by the DNU, which is the political party of Javier Milei. CGT explained on social media, referring to Milei's December 20th degree of necessity and urgency. So you see, the anarcho-capitalist is something of a fascist. He's ruling by decree. CGT leader, whose name is Pablo Moyano, said Wednesday in Buenos Aires that, quote, every time a neoliberal model wins, the first thing they target, is the workers, unquote. And here's another tweet showing the massive general strike in Argentina today, on the 24th, that is, against far-right President Javier Milei and his dangerous attacks on unions, the working class, and civil liberties. Big demonstration. Okay. Also, Martin Lucero, head of the private teachers union in Rosario, Argentina's third largest city, said to La Capital that in quote, in 40 years of democracy, there has never been such a frontal attack on the labor sector as there has been under Milei. Estela de Carlotto, who leads the activist group, I guess that is Abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, founded by grandmothers searching for children kidnapped under Argentina's U.S.-backed 1976 to 83 military dictatorship, which Milei has praised, told the Buenos Aires Times that the demonstration, quote, is a way of giving support to this resolution from the people to form a protest and a call for attention for this whole situation we are living with this strange government, unquote. And here are the pictures, of the demonstration and its size. Lots of happy people coming into the streets. Javier Milei, who said he gets political advice from his dogs, has unleashed what critics have called, quote, a textbook case of shock therapy, unquote, on the Argentine people and the country's moribund economy, devaluing the peso by 50%, slashing social spending, reducing government subsidies, and opening a nation to foreign capitalist exploitation, According to one Cruz Ferra, postdoctoral fellow at the program in Latin American Studies at New Jersey's Princeton University, quote, the economic plan was followed by an all-encompassing presidential decree issued on December 20th, affecting issues as diverse as labor law, healthcare, foreign trade, private property, and mining. The general thrust of it is very clear: an attack on workers' rights, a liberalization of the economy. Well, you might call it, liberalization of the economy. I call it the fascistization of the economy. The strengthening of big business through deregulating the market and numerous incentives, and the erosion of protections for tenants, the environment, and small businesses. So it's all about profits over people, in other words. Although courts have suspended parts, of Malay's decree in response to legal challenges, Cruz Ferrer explained, quote, attention is now shifted to a mirror bill presented to Congress, which includes all issues contained in the decree, plus a request of extraordinary powers to the executive for a period of 4 years, unquote. So, his first move is try to create a dictatorship for 4 years. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland last week, Javier Milei hailed the corporate executives and wealthy global elites gathered there as, quote, heroes, unquote, and, quote, creators of the most extraordinary period of prosperity we've ever seen, unquote. Yeah, where's the prosperity for Argentina? That prosperity did not trickle down to Argentina. Did it? The reason why it hasn't trickled down to Argentina is because Argentina periodically puts in right-wing governments. This government, of Javier Milei, is only the latest of a string, of right-wing governments. What happens is the people alternate the right-wing governments with the left-wing governments. When the right-wing governments get into power, what they do is they go to international funding agencies for loans in currencies other than the peso, loans usually in dollars. Then, when the loans, of course, are given to Argentina, the corporate executives see to it that the money is spent in such a way that Argentina's wealthy elites and corporate executives get various projects from these loans that they profit from, and benefit from. But these loans leave Argentina deeply in debt. Of course, when the population sees what the right-wing governments are doing, it votes them out of power and brings in the left-wing governments again. But the left-wing governments are shackled by the terms of the loans, have to do whatever they can to pay back the loans, and therefore they're stuck with austerity programs. So they become unpopular with the people because they're using austerity programs to gather the money they need to pay back the loans. Now, in Argentina, just recently, before this election, the BRICS group created an opportunity for Argentina to join BRICS. That was Argentina's ticket out of this horrendous cycle they are in. If they had kept the left in power instead of ignorantly shifting over to Milei, at this point, they could have gotten loans from the BRICS Bank that would have been in currencies that they didn't owe any money in, and those loans would have been granted at very good rates. There might even have been some loans granted in the local currency, or loans that could be paid back in the local currency, because BRICS is doing that kind of thing. So Argentina may have been left in a position where it could get financial help, for the development of its country, in such a way that it would not have hobbled, their further development, and perhaps even put them in a position where they would have been able to default on their dollar-denominated debt. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. After all, horror, horror, that a country ought to default, on its debt. Now, it's perfectly okay for corporations to default on debts, for corporations to go into bankruptcy, and for corporations to fail to repay debts. But horror of horrors, if governments should repudiate debt, that is odious debt, that was originally contracted for no good reason at all by elites in the home country, looking only to benefit themselves, instead of the people. The way out for Argentina was actually going into BRICS and seeing what kinds of changes occurring in BRICS could have benefited them over a period of time. But now it's too late. They bought the ideology, of Javier Milei. It was probably a mix, of cynicism and hopelessness. But now they're subject, to Milei's program. From November to December, prices in Argentina increased by more than 1/4, compared with just under 13%, the previous month. Annual inflation now stands at 211%, with Argentina actually rivaling the state of Lebanon for the dubious global top spot. In this government, Javier Milei, quote, in this government of Javier Milei, all the food halls of all the social organizations of churches have not received food from the government, unquote. One Buenos Aires protester said during Wednesday's march. Quote, there is no food. They told us that there is no money, the demonstrator added. Even as the government adopts, quote, measures in favor of the wealthy sector, unquote. That's the way it always is. Argentina's general strike against Javier Milei's austerity package gets underway today. Strike brings together all of the largest union federations in both the public and private sector. These include the CGT, the CTA, and the CTA Autonomo. The strike occurs just 45 days after Javier Milei took over. I'm sure it says that. After libertarian Javier Milei took office, setting a new record. It surpasses that of right-wing President Fernando de la Rua, who faced a general strike 3 months into his tenure in office. Workers are mobilizing against the shock therapy austerity package that will slash social spending as well as subsidies for food and public transportation. Argentina's highly organized workers' unions will test their strength today in the face of possible repression announced by Interior Minister Patricia Bullrich, who suggested that unions will be forced to pay for the cost of policing and could face prosecution if protests block public roads today. The economic situation of the country has deteriorated ever since Javier Milei took power in early December. Annual inflation has reached 211%, up from 160% in November. If the austerity package is approved in Congress, workers fear that basic goods will be out of reach for most of the population. Join us in building a people's media. Your support ensures our independence, keeps us uncensored and fearless, and empowers us to shape a different narrative. Our narrative, the narrative of the oppressed worldwide. Become a patron. This is at patreon.com. RedstreamNet is the name of this group that did this particular tweet. So getting back to the article, CGT on Wednesday published a statement in defense of the civil, social, and labor rights of our nation. Quote, today we see how the government seeks to break the social contract through policies and reforms that only seek to subjugate the rights and achievements of the Argentine people, unquote, the statement asserted. We reaffirm our conviction about the importance of social dialogue as the only tool to grow with equity, and that allows us to develop a, quote, sustainable strategy to achieve development, production, and decent work with social justice. And there's a tweet from the Progressive International. I'm not going to play that. Argentine Security Minister Patricia Bullrich dismissed the strike as the work of mafia unionists, poverty managers, complicit judges, corrupt politicians, all defending their privileges, resisting the change that society decided democratically, that the president leads with determination, unquote. But from Brazil to Belgium, unions throughout the Americas and Union staged solidarity rallies with Argentine workers. The Argentine government adopted a perverse combination of radical political authoritarianism with dictatorial tendencies and ultra-liberal policies that mostly undermine workers. The Unified Workers Central, Brazil's largest trade union, said in a statement, and Miriam Bregman, a Socialist Workers' Party member of the Chamber of Deputies, the lower house of Argentina's National Congress, said in a Wednesday interview with Left Voice that, quote, international solidarity is key to defeating Malay's attack on the working class in Argentina. And quote again, Javier Milei, as he made clear at the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum, is a friend to the super rich whom he treats as heroes. Quote, is it in the interests of the international working class that we prevent the government from moving forward with its anti-worker policies? Well, I don't know how they expect to do that. I won't have time to go through this any further. There's a sign here, down with the IMF, and the far right Zionist president. Javier Milei is evidently a Zionist. Rally in solidarity with the general strike in Argentina. It was a graphic. That was advertising, the general strike. So, quote, the final quote from the article, determined, organized, and massive resistance will be necessary to preserve the rights that are today under attack, unquote. He added, quote, the outcome of these battles will have implications for many years to come. I don't know how the general strike can be successful without actually resorting to violence. Perhaps there could be a color counter-revolution that is actually managed here by the left. If so, it will be a rare color counter-revolution, and a welcome one. I hope we can see that, in Argentina. But I have a feeling before that happens, there's going to be pretty extensive violence there by the right wing. That is, of course, supporting Milei. Okay, it is 10:30. I said I had a hard stop. All I'm going to say here is that the fourth piece I scheduled for tonight is one calling for the end to big oil's U.S. Sacrifice zones, which are characterized as a death sentence. Those are the zones in Texas and also Louisiana, and there are such zones in other states as well, where the fossil fuel industry has harmed the health and environment of local communities. Uh, so it's about the pollution, okay, the toxic pollution, the cancer alley, uh, and people dying due to the oil industry and the way it exploits uh, uh, the environment. Uh, I urge you to read this. The link is in the description. Environmental racism, okay, is at issue. Uh, it's a good discussion of the sacrifice zones that are here, okay, in the United States that we have to do something about. It's up to the regulators to do something about it. You couldn't be sure that if the Agenda 2025 takes over, there will be no action on these sacrifice zones. Instead, it will be made easier for the corporations exploiting these sacrifice zones to continue to put profits, okay, before people. And also to stretch out the time before the end of our reliance on fossil fuels, and also the inimical effect they have on people, okay, and the environment. So I don't have time to cover that, the final article, of course. So I leave it to you to read that. And so here we are. I will take a few comments and then stop. See, Steve says, I've been to several South American countries, but not Argentina. I've heard, okay, Buenos Aires is very beautiful. So have I. I've never been to Argentina either. Argentina, well, they elected him. So, yeah, but we don't have to respect the election of totalitarians, Steve. That's not part of the democratic social contract. Steve says dogs are smart. I laugh out loud. Kay says, yes, they are, Steve. Steve says, correct, Doc, about the BRICS. Yeah, I know. BRICS was a way out for them. It was stupid uh, not to enter BRICS, which, if they had reelected the Fernandez government, I guess it was the Fernandez government, okay, okay, they would have gotten into BRICS. They had the invitation. All they had to do was accept it. They would have been, okay, in BRICS by now. There'll be new currency arrangements that will be coming up in BRICS probably by March. And they could have taken advantage of those and taken advantage of the BRICS Bank as well, which, by the way, the BRICS Bank is run by Dilma Rousseff, okay, who's a Brazilian and very close to Lula. And they would have been very friendly to Argentina's requests for financial help. You can be sure of that. So they gave it up. So I guess that's all I'm going to say for tonight. I don't see any other comments. So I will say good night to you. You will see me tomorrow, okay, at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, talking about the International Court of Justice results. And I will also be there for the Dump the Corruption show tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. That, of course, okay, is my show. And I don't know exactly what I'll cover there yet. At this point, I have some ideas, but they may be preempted by what goes on at the International Court of Justice. So thank you all for coming, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow at one of the sessions.